Welcome to Beyond the Fundamentals. In this video, in this session, I want to talk to you about Paul's models of salvation. We're going to look at 4 different models of salvation. In this session, I'm very intentionally wanting to break you away from thinking a certain way, and I want you to start considering thinking a very different way, not just about salvation, but about specifically how the Bible comes to us and how we should be taking the Bible in and what we should be doing with it in general. This is something that I've had an inkling about for a while, but only just in the last couple of months, after hearing a couple of scholars talk about a couple of things, has the inkling come to the point where I feel like I can put some words to it now. And you'll see why in a few minutes. So when we look at these 4 different models of salvation, and whenever you see me give lists like this, never presume that the lists are designed to be definitive or exhaustive or anything like that. These are just 4 things. I'm pretty sure we could look through the text and find other models, or maybe look at different models Jesus might have or something like that. But the ones we're going to look at today are the judicial forensic model, the participationist model, the mediation model, and the redemption model. And what has historically happened, especially in evangelicalism, we are familiar with these terms. You probably understand where I'm going with mediation. You probably understand redemption. You probably understand judicial forensic. And like participationist, what is that? Okay. And I didn't come up with these. These are categories that I've recently heard other scholars using, that they've been using for years apparently, that for whatever reason I've never been exposed to. And you never want to think that you've been exposed to everything. I've had, half the New Testament memorized basically since I was in the 3rd and 4th grade. And I've got a theology degree. I've taken the Bible seriously all my life. So I don't want to go Dunning-Kruger and presume that because I'm identified with Christianity and the Bible and all of this, that I happen to have it all figured out, or that I won't hear something new and insightful. Okay? People ask sometimes, well, what's the one thing you changed your mind on in the last year? Which is kind of a baiting question. But this is one of the things, and I wouldn't say changed my mind, but I've kind of known something was there and have been digging around for it, and I feel like it's finally congealing into something that can be said and communicated to where other people can hear it. So we will look at these and go through them. This isn't going to be highly technical. I'll just get into it. Okay, just try to follow along. You're going to need to listen to the whole video to get what I'm saying. Okay, please don't start commenting when you're just a few minutes in. I want you to get this whole thing, and I want you to sit with it for a week or two. Now you can comment after you watch the video, but what I really want you to do is sit with this for a few weeks, a few months, and see how this works on you. Okay? And then I want some feedback to see if you can help me kind of make this perspective better, or where we can communicate it better. Okay? I don't feel like I do a great job of communicating sometimes. So what I want to start with is I want to look at what Jesus does sometimes. He will talk about a topic and he will give you comparisons, like or as. Now Jesus, not Jesus, but Hosea, it says, I will speak to them in similitudes. We would say simile. But similes, analogies, metaphors, I will speak to them in similitudes. In other words, do you understand this? God might say, ask us, and we will say no. And he will say, well, do you understand this? And it might be something in creation, like go to the ant thou sluggard. Do you understand ants? Do you understand wolves? Do you understand eagles? Do you understand these things? Yeah, I understand that. Well, this is like this. And so a lot of the Bible is like that. It's God finding a way to speak to us in similitudes, because the thing that is, number one, is ineffable. It can't be spoken. And number 2, our perception of it is so limited that any attempt to communicate it, you see, wisdom and perception doesn't transmit down, right? And so since it doesn't transmit down, there is a degree to which the imagination must be cultivated in the correct direction. Now, when I say imagination, you might just think about, spontaneous fiction of the mind. That's not what I'm talking about. When it comes to the greatest scientific discoveries, whether it's in physics or anywhere else, if you read Einstein, a lot of times the thing, the way it is, has to be imagined first before discovery can lean into it. And I understand we have the scientific method, but the scientific method rarely leads to truth. Now, it does lead to a lot of facts and a lot of truths, okay? But when it comes to the discovery of the major theories of how things work, a lot of times they are imagined, and the scientific method is designed to falsify things that have been imagined inappropriately, if you will. But imagination plays a key role. So the idea is that I'm going to hit you, and I'm speaking as if from God, or from a biblical author or something like that. I'm going to hit you. I can't say the thing to you, and you couldn't get it if I could say it. So I'm going to hit you with a bunch of different angles that are all pointing to it, kind of, and then see if you can start to form up something that matches all the things that I pointed to in some ways. See if you can detect the through line between these things. So Jesus talks about the kingdom of heaven, and he says the kingdom of heaven is like, okay, and we have a grain of mustard seed, leaven, a treasure hidden in a field, a merchant seeking goodly pearls, a net that was cast into a sea and gathered every kind of fish, or of every kind. It doesn't say fish there. A scribe, which is instructed in the kingdom of heaven, is like unto a man that is a householder. The kingdom of heaven is like a man that is a householder, which went out early in the morning to hire laborers into his vineyard. The kingdom of heaven is like a certain king which made a marriage for his son. And I'm not getting into all of these, but just to show you, the kingdom of heaven is compared to all these different things. And most people kind of know not to take these comparisons, analogies, or parables and try to make technical dogma out of them, okay? Because if the kingdom of heaven is like all these things, then what that means is no one of these parables is definitive or complete or exhaustive. I need them all to help me form up the picture of what it is that Jesus is getting at here. And so I want to visually depict this for you. I've put it in images here. I just took all those things that were mentioned and I found an image of them, and they're all pointing towards something. So the thing that Jesus is trying to convey, which in this case would be the kingdom of heaven, all these things are like it in some way. Now, they're not like it in every way. So if you were to go up here and take the grain of mustard seed or the leaven or something, and you were to study everything about a mustard seed, you might find some things about mustard seeds that actually don't match the analogy. It's not what Jesus is trying to say, okay? And that's why we have a lot of different analogies. So we don't want to make the mistake of overfitting. We want to allow the looseness of a comparison and a parable for the sake that it's intended, and not try to draw more connections or parallels than are intended. Now, the degree of, as soon as you start trying to explain how many connections and parallels are there, you kind of lose the point, okay? You lose the point of having an analogy, something like poetic language, something that's an inkling, something that's drawing you in to consider and ponder something that you cannot yet perceive, okay? So this is one of the problems of Scripture, okay? Now, the way we do things, since the Enlightenment and the Renaissance and the printing press and all that, we have made the mistake. Well, I also want to say this about when it comes to the kingdom of heaven. There are also parables on the kingdom of God, okay? So if in your imagination you presume that the kingdom of heaven and the kingdom of God are the same, and they're used interchangeably, but they're not, then you can come up with you might imagine a thing that's not being pointed at. On the other hand, if you presume or believe that they are different and not exactly the same, but they are, then you also might imagine something that is not intended to be pointed to. You understand what I'm saying? So in other words, there are a lot of things that we need to understand what our criteria of falsification is whenever we start to try to delve into the thing that's not said or whatever we think the takeaway is supposed to be. And I'm avoiding the word conclusion on purpose because I don't like the idea. It's not helpful to have an idea where you land and never move again. And I shall not be moved. I know all the things, okay? Just don't go there. Hear me. Hear what I'm trying to say. Your perception, if you mature appropriately throughout your lifetime, your perception should continually improve and expand, like your spiritual perception, your intuition, all kinds of things, your perspectival capacity. Your perception should continually expand and grow and develop and become more nuanced. There should be different characteristics to it. And the more you land on cold, hard, conclusive facts, as this is the way it is, this is the interpretation, the less your perception will grow. So I want to encourage you away from being emotionally identified with a particular way of seeing things, because all that does is block you off from the better way of seeing things that is coming soon to your body, mind, and spirit that you will not have access to because you foreclosed on it. You foreclosed on it ideologically. There's a lot of ideological foreclosure going on. So the problem that we make, I come from a military background, you can see, is the problem that we make is we presume that the Bible is some kind of technical trade language. So in the military, we have technical manuals. And you can see down here on this diagram that in these technical manuals, where's my laser pointer here? In these technical manuals, you have, like for this uniform needs to be worn this exact certain way. And I think this uniform is already out of date, but this is the one that I wore when I was in. And when you're wearing your dress uniform, especially, everything, this has to be 5/8 of an inch away, and it has to be centered perfectly, and this has to be worn this way, and this has to go on the left side, and everything is detailed down to the finest detail to where you can evaluate everything should be the same or aligned properly, that sort of thing. Over here, I have these pictures of technical manuals for a Humvee telling you what all the components are and where everything is supposed to be. You're supposed to have your water bottle over here, your gas can over here, your emergency equipment over here. Like everything is identified out exactly as it should be. When I was writing operations orders when I was in Iraq, I remember the major telling me, I was a lieutenant at the time, and he said, you need to work through everything. And in your Annex H, for your signal annex to this operations order for our redeployment, you need to say everything. You need to tell them how to turn their computer off, how to close it down, how to pack it, where to put the mouse. You need to tell them everything. It needs to be in the order so that everybody knows exactly what to do. And for that kind of activity, that's appropriate. And the problem is we take that kind of mindset and we think that either the Bible is that thing or that there is a supreme technical understanding up in the sky somewhere that all the authors of the Bible had in mind when they were writing, or that the Holy Spirit had in mind when he was inspiring. However you want to say it, doesn't really matter. And then if that were the case, then systematic theology would be our attempt to reconstruct the technical manual that the biblical authors have in mind and are loosely referring to. That's the kind of thing that's going on. And it's not like that. It's not like that. It's simply something that can't be seen. So we treat the Bible as if it's intended to be a guidebook of precision with highly specified technicality. And we get this from our post-Enlightenment unconscious programming. The Renaissance, the Enlightenment, the post-Enlightenment rationalism, all this kind of stuff. That has programmed us to think in a certain way. And all the authors of Scripture come before that. Now, there are two lines of things. There is like Heraclitus and Socrates, and then there's Aristotle. See? And that has been a problem since mankind. So Aristotle is as much as you could say he brought to Greek philosophy and thought and all that kind of stuff, and it's helpful in a technical way in certain instances and in shallow first-hand instances. His way of thinking is kind of a reduction and more kind of like a backsliding away from where Heraclitus and Socrates would be. Okay? And so then you have the church was largely participatory, and Augustine shows up and kind of takes us back to Aristotle. So you kind of always have that, and then Descartes is more this technical Aristotelian dualistic kind of barriers between everything. You've always got this way of seeing things, which is more right hemisphere, which is Heraclitus and Socrates and Jesus, okay? And then you have this more left hemisphere way of seeing things, which is Aristotle and Augustine and Calvinists and all this. And the Protestant Reformation basically was an explosion of the left hemisphere on steroids. Now, it wasn't the start of it. The start of it, like the formation of the Nicene Creed, having creeds at all, Augustine, the church councils, all that stuff is left hemisphere, left hemisphere, left hemisphere. It's not good. Not good. It's not in keeping with the way that is Christ. None of it is. And then the Protestant Reformation basically just turned the burner all the way up on that. Just light the whole thing up to the point. And I know the Catholics needed to be reformed, and there was a lot of corruption, and I'm with you on that. But there was also a lot of things where they followed the lead of the Protestants in coming up with propositionally reductive versions of everything. They put out their Douay-Rheims Bible. There's a Counter-Reformation. And the Counter-Reformation had the error of following the Protestants down the left hemisphere technical language tunnel, which should not have been done. Okay? So it's almost like the wrong person for the job. Yeah, the Catholics needed to be reformed for sure, but the wrong people for the job stepped up, if you will. And they didn't take things back to the Bible. They took things back to Aristotle and Augustine. And of course, the left hemisphere, it only sees the maps. Your brain only sees the maps that the left hemisphere presents to it. We'll get into more of that in our upcoming video on John 3:20. So we get all this way of thinking about the Bible from our post-Enlightenment unconscious programming, and this is not how the Bible was intended to be received or interacted with, engaged with. So when debates occur under this premise, all it does is further alienate people from the original intent of Scripture. So when people ask me to debate, and they don't understand that they think debates are a normal part of what every kind of Christian thing should be doing, because everything is propositionally reductive, and it's a race to the bottom to see who can have the most explanatory power with all the right conclusions. And that's not what the way of Christ is at all. And so debating, the most real truth will not survive a debate, especially if the truth is in its groundbreaking form. Okay? I recently saw one of those little animal videos online on Facebook, and it was a full-grown orange house cat in a spat with a baby tiger cub. Okay? Now, while the tiger cub is a baby, yeah, maybe the house cat can kind of win a fight or two, you know? But we both know that that tiger and that house cat are two very different kinds of animals. And you put them in their full-grown form. And so the ideas that are most true, they need to be cultivated. And so imagine like an apple tree that is one day going to feed hundreds of people. But when it's a sproutling, you can run it over with a lawnmower, you see? And it's just gone. You know, maybe it'll come back. Like, I understand all that, but you get my idea, you see? And what debate is Debate is a lawnmower to the best ideas, or the best perceptions of truth. Debate is a lawnmower that runs over them. It makes them so they're never going to come up. Imagine you planted 100 apple seeds, but you mowed your yard with a lawnmower, every 3 days, and they never got a chance to grow. That's what debate does to the concept of growth and transformation and cultivation of insight and growth of perception. That's what it does. It's like running a lawnmower. Having rivalry, debate, combativeness, comparison, whose idea is right and wrong. That's why we need to hold things in possibility space. We all need to be engaged in exploring together, not in combating each other to see whose idea has the most explanatory power. Because all that is a lawnmower that runs over the apple tree. So that's not a good thing to do. So ever since the Enlightenment, humankind has been trying to do something good, like science. In science, if you look at our scientific endeavors, we're trying, you got Louis Pasteur, you got Madame Curie, you got people, ruling out spontaneous generation. You got people learning how to make vaccines, learning what germs are. We got all kinds, Gregor Mendel, we got all kinds of great scientific discoveries and advancements, and Isaac Newton and physics and calculus. That's wonderful. And that's great. And in that domain, it's important to try to be as technical and precise as possible. But the problem is, since that kind of mindset took over the scientific world after the Renaissance and the Enlightenment and the post-Enlightenment, we have made the mistake, and what I mean by we, our entire Western civilization has made the mistake of thinking that the Bible was an attempt to do that same kind of thing. And it was not. So they're not in competition with each other. So when you hear these skeptics and atheists and people who claim to have, deconstructed and all this, they think that their faith rests in a post-Enlightenment style truth claim that the Bible makes that should be interpreted in accordance with the terms of post-Enlightenment rationalistic metrics. You see? And that's not what the Bible's trying to do at all. That's not what it's trying to do, you see? And so when people lose their faith because of things like that, they have a fundamental flaw of misunderstanding their own unconscious programming, and they fall victim to it by throwing the baby out with the bathwater, not realizing the why. Why do we have the Bible? And so what I want to do is try to help you see that today and then really apply it specifically to Paul's salvation models. And I really think this is going to transform the way that you see the New Testament. And I think it's going to be a lot better for you. You're going to get a lot out of this, I think. I am. I'm getting a lot out of it, out of thinking this way. Since the Bible purportedly originates from the creator of the cosmos, we often mistakenly treat the Bible as if it is some kind of theory of everything that is in the same line of the physics that have come from anyone from, Isaac Newton all the way up to Schrodinger and Feynman and these guys. And that it's in a theory of everything, and that it's in its ability to explain. Now, I want that word explain to stand out to you, because I'm going to be juxtaposing two different things here. Explanation and orienting. Two very different things. Okay. So this is very wrong. The Bible is not a theory of everything that's there to try to explain ontological reality, as a lot of people treat it. And I'm not saying that it's wrong in what it says. What I'm saying is that's not the point that it's here. It's not that the Bible is incorrect per se. It's that the Bible isn't to explain. It's that the intent isn't to explain. The intent is to orient. So when I give you explanatory power, the Greeks used to teach people how to give training language is different than explaining language. Okay, they used to teach people how to give these big long speeches, And what these orators could speak for 6, 7, 8 hours at a time. And one of the memory devices that they used to remember what they were going to talk about next is that they would think of a house that had a bunch of different rooms in it. And when you go into this room, it's got this color to help you remember. It's got these 3 items in there, and that's your trigger to talk about those 3 things. And then I'm going to come out, and I'm going to go into a different room, and it's a different color, and it's got these other 3 items. And that's my trigger to talk about those 3 things. And so they would have this visual imagery in their mind of being in this house that had all these different rooms and all these different things were in there. And we take for granted that so many things are written down these days, but writing was kind of an expensive and time-consuming thing to do, so people used their memories a lot more back then by default without even thinking about it. It wasn't even a task or a hard thing to do. It's just what was done, okay? And it would be a mistake to think that that's an explanation of how memory works. If I were to try to explain to you, hey, the way memory works is you go in your brain and it's like it's organized and there's a little house of neurons in there, and there's one room that has these ideas and another room that has these memories and another, that kind of thing. So it's what makes for good training and good orienting to make a person effective at doing something like rhetoric. Okay, be a rhetorician, whatever it's called. Does not equate to being a good explanation for how memory works, even though it is a good training tool for how memory can work. Do you understand the difference? Okay. So training language and explanatory power of how memory works, 2 very different things. And you can be very effective at one while being completely inept at the other, and vice versa. And it might not be inept because it's not what you're trying to do. I'm not trying to explain how the brain works or how memory works in the brain. I'm trying to train you how to give a 6-hour-long speech and remember everything you're supposed to say. You see? So explanatory power, what Christianity today has done, it has been reduced down into explanatory power. It's intended to be training and orienting, right? But it has been, we've misused it, misapplied it as if it's attempting to explain. And it's not even trying to, okay? The authors of the Bible were not laden with post-Enlightenment rationalism and didn't feel like they had to succumb to an ever-growing Overton window that included a demand for that kind of thing. Just wasn't there. Wasn't the point at all. So I want to look at language types. When you look at language types, you can have masculine language, feminine language, and these over here on the left, they are direct, technical, trade, okay? Masculine language, feminine language, direct and indirect. And when I say masculine and feminine, I'm not necessarily talking about men and women, even though it most often goes that way, because sometimes men can employ feminine thinking and women can employ masculine thinking. And this usually shows up when a man, masculine language uses semantics to convey a logical payload. Okay? Feminine language uses semantics to convey an emotional payload. And to feminine language, whatever the semantics are, whether or not they map to something logically isn't the point at all. And I'm not saying that women are illogical. That's not my point. So one of the most famous things that pops up is a man and a woman. The man's like, "Hey, where do you want to eat? What do you want to eat for dinner? Where do you want to go for dinner?" And the woman's like, "I don't know. Where do you want to go?" And then you go back and forth this way for a while, and then finally the man says something like, "Well, now he starts thinking of." He might start off by listing where he actually wants to go. And she's like, "I don't want to go there." And then he might suggest now something that he thinks where she might want to go. And then she'll say something like, "Well, if you want to," and it's like the man is just trying to figure out where to eat. He's trying to put food in his belly. It's that simple. It's nothing beyond that at all. But feminine language is using this discussion as an interface to emotionally figure out how much she means to him. And is he going to pick the place that he knows I want to go because he also wants to go there? Or, there's all kinds of little things in there. Now, a lot of this is subconscious. They don't know that they're doing this, male or female. They don't know the difference between these two. I saw a movie recently where a woman was all upset. She asked, turn the radio off. And the guy's like, why? This is a great song. And she goes, I hate guitars. And then later on in the same movie, she wants a different song to be turned up. And the guy's like, well, I thought you hated guitars. She's like, no, I love guitars. You see, it's not that she's lying. In the first sense, she just wanted things to be quiet so that they could think clearly and have the conversation they were trying to have. And the husband was overmapping to technical, conveying logical information, using semantics to convey logical information. He's thinking, oh, I just learned that she hates guitars. That's not what was going on. Okay. So there's a miscommunication between the type of language being used. I hope you're following me on this. Okay. I'm not trying to do a battle of the sexes or anything like that, but just the difference between masculine and feminine language, where both can use semantic information to convey either a logical point or an emotional point. And like the logical point may not match the emotional point at all. There might not be a direct connect there. Kind of have to read between the lines. And this can go both ways. So masculine language tends to be direct, and feminine language tends to be indirect. Okay? And what we're looking for is, like, technical language is very direct. This is exactly how it is. This is what the manual says. This is where the gas can goes. Technical language. This is how you conduct a PMCS on a Humvee. You have to check the oil. It has to be exactly this many inches, all this kind of thing. And so we are looking for but technical language and poetic language are very different things. And if you think of poetry, if you've ever enjoyed poetry, you understand that poetry, what can be perceived and enjoyed through poetry, is very much more vast than the words on the page. Much more vast than the words on the page. And you know this. Now, technical language is easy to grasp. The left hemisphere loves it. Poetic language has a lot more available to it, but it's harder to nail down. Like, you can't, it's hard to organize a team that operates efficiently around poetic language. Okay, it's hard to build a house and lay the foundation and all this, have the blueprints using poetic language. You imagine that? Imagine working in an architecture firm and using only poetry to communicate. How that would go. It'd be very difficult. And then there's trade language, which is very precise and direct. And then there's familial language, like familial, like family. How do you talk in your family? Is it the same way you talk at work? Is when a doctor is on the operating table conducting a surgery, when he's at the operating table, not on the operating table. Do you think he's talking the same way there that he's talking to his kids when he gets home from work? I don't think so. There's engineering language, and there's cultivating language. So the Bible is mostly over here, okay? God's not a girl. El Shaddai is a feminine term. It means multi-breasted, nurturing mother. That's what the term El Shaddai means. God is everything. God's the creator of masculine and feminine. And everything is within God. There's nothing that's excluded, okay? So all forms. Now, there are some very direct things, okay? But what we demand, because of our unconscious programming, we demand religion to be masculine, direct, technical, trade language, of an engineering type thing. We're going to do this in engineering. When we send somebody to seminary so that they can be a pastor, that's engineering mindset. It doesn't work that way. If you wanted a true elder, you wouldn't send them to seminary. You would find a Mr. Miyagi somewhere that could cultivate them. A Yoda somewhere that could cultivate them. You can't engineer spiritual maturity. You have to cultivate it. It's a very different kind of thing. So the Bible is not this direct, technical, trade, engineering, masculine, kind of straightforward thing. And the reason, one of the many reasons, is because the thing that can be said can't directly be said. That's one of the main reasons. And so when we treat the Bible like it is directly explaining rather than training or orienting, we make a huge fundamental flaw right off the bat. So our left hemispheric brain mind kind of things, and our limited capacity for perspectival awareness, like all of that kind of stuff limits and inhibits us from seeing the Bible correctly. So think about this when it comes to all passages, not just what we're doing. So I have two pictures here. In one, Mufasa is telling Simba about the light. Everything the light touches is our kingdom. And he's using the light to orient Simba to the expanse of the kingdom. Now down here, I've got a bunch of scientists explaining light and how it works. Now both of these are talking about the light, but they're doing two very different things with it. The Bible is like Mufasa talking to Simba. The Bible is not like a bunch of scientists trying to explain light. Neither one of these are incorrect. But if you thought that what Mufasa was doing is the same thing that what these scientists are trying to do, you would be severely disoriented. Okay? And you would not be able to produce results. In both pictures, people are talking about light. Mufasa is talking about the light and using it to orient his son so that he doesn't get eaten by hyenas, among other things. The other group is scientists explaining what light is and how it works. They are very different. One is not wrong because it doesn't meet the task of the other. They are trying to do two separate things. The explanation from the scientists would not help Simba orient properly, and Mufasa's guidance would not satisfy the goal of the scientists. Neither are wrong. Both are sufficient to the task at hand. The Bible is more like Mufasa, and post-Enlightenment thinking is more like these scientists, other than the fact that it is based on too many false premises, which didn't start to crumble until the days of Max Planck and Erwin Schrödinger. Now, you should... this slide actually comes from our presentation on escaping your unconscious programming, and I highly recommend that you go watch that video. So, church today versus the way of Christ. Okay. Today, churches, denominations, and religious leaders are evaluated on how precise and plausible their explanatory power is. Now, up here, I want you to very much notice this. Over here, I have explanatory power, and I have orientation. The scientist explaining what light is and how it works. Orientation, Mufasa orienting Simba to the borders of the kingdom. Over here, the churchianity is knowing that. We have to know that. It's all propositions. A proposition is, I like to make a statement. I know that cats are mammals. Okay, it's a proposition. Whereas seeing clearly, okay, is knowing that the house cat eventually is not going to win against the tiger cub. It's kind of a different thing than knowing that. Today, churches, denominations, and religious leaders are evaluated on how precise and plausible their explanatory power is. And this is the premise behind all debates and rivalrous dynamics. Unfortunately, moral rather than epistemic metrics are smuggled in as disqualifiers. Having perfect epistemically warranted and airtight explanatory power is discredited by not meeting presumed moral criteria. What do you mean by that? So I'm putting out information a lot online on my YouTube channel, and then people want to come in the comments section, and you get all kinds of people in there. A lot of them they come very antagonistic and rivalrous and combative. Almost knocked my glasses off the table. I'm trying to move my chair around here. They're very combative, and they'll ask a question like, well, how do you explain this? Well, how do you explain this? How do you explain this? What about this? What do you believe about this? And they want to evaluate my explanatory power of the thing against the explanatory power that they're on that team. See, it's teams, tribalism. And if I were to offer an explanatory power that was true and accurate, epistemically warranted, they would disqualify it for moral reasons. well, you're just prideful. You're just arrogant. You're an open theist. You don't like the sovereignty of God. Don't you know that God is all-knowing? That they will come at me with something other than listening to what I'm saying. And they'll do this ahead of time. Doesn't matter what I say. They're going to do this. And this is predictable. There's not a thought in their head. And that's unfortunately what happens. Like if you were to talk to James White about models of salvation, you would not get a conversation modeled around epistemically warranted observations. You would get accusations about how immoral and inept you are for disagreeing, and you're full of pride, and this shows that natural man receiveth not the things of the Spirit. It's Gnosticism and moralistic shaming, rather than an honest, good faith, earnest, exploratory endeavor into what the real truth is. But genuine Christianity is more about transforming into the kind of person who can be oriented in accordance with a wind that never predictably blows the same direction twice. And I have here John chapter 3, verse 8, and I also have right below it Ephesians 5:18. And in John chapter 3, verse 8, we see that the wind bloweth whithersoever it listeth, and thou hearest the sound thereof, that canst not tell whence it cometh or whither it goeth. So is everyone that is born of God. So somebody who is born of God, that's what their life is like. Calvinists try to misappropriate this verse to how someone becomes born of God. That's not what it's talking about at all. This is talking about the way of life, the way a person moves that is born of God. There's not a left hemispherically predictable mechanism for how it is they move and navigate through life. But they are on track with something. In Ephesians 5:18, so why do I have this here? In Ephesians 5:18, be not drunk with wine wherein is excess, but be filled with the Spirit. My Calvinist professor, Dr. Dale Yance, explained that this passage is not about, I always thought this was interesting, it's not about being filled like a cup being filled with liquid, okay? It's more about being filled like a sail is filled with wind. Or he thought that if Paul were in the modern day, he might use like an electrical appliance being filled with an electricity. It's a flow through filling, not a full and go away. Not a waterfall methodology, but an agile methodology kind of thing. It's like a sail. You constantly need wind, and as soon as the wind stops blowing, you can't go anywhere no matter how you turn the sail. Or how you steer the udder. You need wind. Or the rudder. I said the udder. The rudder. Oh my goodness. So when we look at Paul's models of salvation, the judicial on the top left, the mediator, the participatory, and then the redemptive models. Okay? I have them all. The problem is we treat them like it's some kind of masculine, technical, direct trade language, engineering language, technical. And then we make these dogmas out of them. And you can't be justified unless this, and this. And I don't think Paul is intending to give us technical trade language to explain salvation. It's less important to Paul how it works and more important that it works. And the way Paul talks about it is more similar to how Jesus talks about the kingdom of heaven than we realize. Remember, the kingdom of heaven is kind of obvious because we have so many phrases the kingdom of heaven is like. Okay? So it's obvious to us that these are all pointing at something, and let's try to imagine what the through line is, that what could these all be pointing to? And there is intentionally a little bit of mysteriousness to it. And what we fail to realize is that the Greek mind of the day and the way rhetoric was done and that kind of stuff. And I know Paul said we didn't come with all wisdom of words and that kind of thing, but the way people thought back then wasn't to give you a direct technical thing about how it was done per se. It was more, let's hit it from this angle, then hit it from this angle, and hit it from this angle, then hit it from this angle. And everybody knew you were doing that, so you didn't have to say that that's what you were doing. And so Paul is not giving these things to try to tell us that that is precisely and exactly the technical language for precisely how it's done, because these different models contradict with each other in a few ways if you think about it, which I'm not going to take the time to get into here, but anybody who's mopping up what I'm spilling today, you get it. So Paul's models of salvation were not intended to be taken as technical trade language, but they're more like models, metaphors, analogies, parables, something like that. The kingdom of heaven is like salvation. Well, you could say it's like a judge in a law, in a courtroom, and everybody's guilty. And we'll go through these more in a minute, and then we'll wrap up and end. Okay, so the way salvation actually works, he's not giving the actual mechanics of how salvation works. He's giving you different ways to think about it to try to help you understand kind of how it works. But the actual mechanics is ineffable. And so the churchianity over here, what we're used to with all of our debates and how to answer this question and what church should I go to, the churchianity is this stuff over here. Okay? It is this technical trade language kind of stuff. Okay, and it's not what it should be. It does not do well. Real Christianity, the way of Christ is over here. It's more like sailing a boat. Being in touch with the wind and knowing how to move the sail and the rudder so that you go in the right direction. It's more like surfing. Okay, you can't teach a class in a classroom, then suddenly you have a surfer. You actually have to practice it. These images over here I just typed into Google give me a picture of catching the winning pass or shooting the winning shot. You see? Yeah, Michael Jordan over here shooting the winning shot. Or I have Mr. Miyagi over here teaching Danielson how to block after he was sanding the floor. Or Ip Man over here with his students teaching them Kung Fu. And I think the model of teacher and student there in those Ip Man movies can help us understand what it was like for a teacher or a master to have disciples in the day of Christ than the way we might think of it today in our Western society. So the way of Christ is more like this. There's a movement to it. You can't take a class on basketball then suddenly be the closer on championship games. Okay? You have to cultivate that. The way of Christ must be cultivated. It can't be taught. It's not transmissible downward. It's not transmissible to lower levels of consciousness, lower levels of capacity. It has to be cultivated. I want you to move away from having a rigid dogmatic view of these kinds of things, and instead I want you to back off seeing more options floating in space. See all the different models of salvation and see them as all trying to point to something that's ineffable. You don't have to own any of them. You don't have to be connected to or identify with any of them. Suspend judgment and let them hang out there in free open space. Explore them with no stakes and no anxiety. You don't have to defend them. Okay? The point of doing this isn't so that you eventually hone in on the one correct theory of everything that fits them all and produce the correct disambiguated system. You're going to write the new systematic theology that's finally correct. That's the wrong kind of thing to even try to do. The reason you do this is because the more you can explore these without getting attached to any of it or getting defensive about any of it, the more clearly you will start to see the entire picture. You can start to flow with fractal salvation rather than it be a list of things you're supposed to believe and list and defend and recite and all that. And ultimately, you should be able to generate your own models that are in keeping with the spirit of these others. So you could say, well, if Jesus or Paul were alive today, like what, if I were to talk about computer networks, what would a model of salvation in those terms look like? If I were to talk about a computer itself with the software and the kernel and the root level privilege, what different components could I use to point to how salvation works? Instead of talking about a king and a monarchy, what if I were to do it in terms of a republic? Okay, what would it look like then? If I were to talk about it in terms of how a car operates or in terms of how all of traffic operates. See, there's no limit. And so it might be a good exercise to think, if I were to explain salvation in terms of this, who would the different players be? What would the transactions be? What would the roles be? How would it be appropriated? Those kinds of things. Be a good thought exercise to do. Okay. So many people, and this is just every once in a while this guy pops up in my YouTube feed. Many people like the Mindshift YouTube channel are presenting Paul and Jesus as if they significantly contradict. I said in face, but it should be in fact. In fact, we have carried this over into Christianity. Systems like covenantal theology, dispensationalism, they both take for granted that Paul and Jesus appear to contradict. And these are two different ways to attempt to disambiguate those apparent contradictions. So, covenantal or dispensational theology are two different camps, schools of thought, where they're like, yeah, these two guys seem to contradict. In what way could we make them not contradict? Okay, and what's the likelihood that anybody doing that with all of our unconscious programming is actually formulating the intended right way? Okay, and both of them include transitions, which I don't think need to be there, and I'll explain why in a second. I think. So, systems like covenantal theology and dispensationalism both take for granted that Paul and Jesus appear to contradict, and these are two different ways to attempt to disambiguate these apparent contradictions. The problem is that these are all from a mindset that is propositionally reductive, both of them, left hemisphere dominated, has an external locus of authority, almost no perspectival capacity, and riddled with the ailments of our post-Enlightenment rationalistic societal programming, which demands everything to be in explanatory form, in technical language, and paying homage to the metrics of the false premises associated with our unconscious programming. So yes, we are sick. We are slaves to misunderstanding. And when Paul talks about sin, it's this, just the condition that we're in, like the ignorance that a baby is in. You could call him a slave to that, unless somebody else educates that child and indoctrinates and enculturates into society. He's going to remain ignorant, like that movie Nell, where Jodie Foster wound up playing the adult version of a child who was completely left to herself from the time she was like 3 or something like that. So when sharing those premises, yes, Paul and Jesus do very much contradict if you share those false premises. Of course they do. So the covenantal theologists and the dispensationalists have more in common than they realize, but they are unconscious to that which they have in common. They're unconscious of it. And they think they're against each other. And when you become more conscious of the shared premises, they are on the side of having those false premises, and we are on the side of being disabused of those false premises. So covenantal and dispensational theology are both like two different sides of the same kind of wrongness. Okay? So when sharing those premises, in other words, left hemisphere, reductive, propositionally dominant, all that stuff, Paul and Jesus very much do contradict if all of those false premises were true, but they're not. But for those who have participatory perception of the unified field of reality, called unitive awareness by some, Einstein called it unified field, then they are in perfect harmony and they need no system to disambiguate them. Okay? Now, unitive awareness cannot be taught. It has to be experienced. It cannot be communicated down. You cannot make a dogma out of it. And unfortunately, I know some people who are trying to teach unitive awareness. You can't teach it. And that's one of the problems with it. There's some things that you can see from the top of the mountain that you shouldn't even try to teach people that are on the bottom of the mountain who have never been to the top, because then they will start repeating the things without having had the experience, okay? And that's where you go from Miyagi to Kreese, Cobra Kai. And that's not what you want. And all of churchianity today is Cobra Kai. So it's helpful, you might call this eisegesis on purpose. And so the problem with eisegesis, as it's typically done and warned against, is when you come in with an idea that you are emotionally attached to, and you read that into the text. Another way to do because for those of you who aren't following, these are terms used in biblical hermeneutics. Exegesis is what everyone says you're supposed to do. That's where you draw the meaning out of the text. You start with a blank slate and you draw the meaning out of the text, presuming nothing. And I agree with that. I'm not against that at all. The problem is we kind of can't do it because of all of our unconscious programming. It's kind of impossible to do. So we take baby steps. And eisegesis is when you come in with preloaded ideas and you read them into the text. That's Calvinism, provisionism, dispensationalism, covenantal theology, Mormonism, Jehovah's Witness, Amway, Flex Seal Pro, all the stuff. Okay, it's all the same thing. There's no difference to any of that stuff. When you do eisegesis and you are emotionally identified, like I am a Calvinist, and then you're reading Calvinist into the text, that's a problem. And you're never going to be able to undo that, okay, until something shakes you awake. And if you're a provisionist, you're like, I am a provisionist. You're going to impose provisionism onto every text you read. And that's not what you want to do. But if you're neither one, you see, a provisionist can only eisegete with their provisionism. A Calvinist can only eisegete with their Calvinism. And they can't not do it. Okay? So, at a higher level of consciousness, what you can do is you can say, well, I'm not a Calvinist or a provisionist, and genuinely mean that, not in a false dichotomy Calvinist kind of way of saying it. But I can apply, let's apply the Calvinistic mindset and go through this passage and see how it feels. Try it on. Okay, let's lift that off. Now let's put on the provisionist glasses, put on that outfit, and then let's go back through the text and see how that feels. And to be able to do so, steel manning each one as you go. There's value in that if you can do it dispassionately. In other words, you're not pre-invested in one of the outcomes being correct. You're just seeing how it feels. And then I'm of the belief or perspective at this moment that if you do that with a unitive awareness mindset, which can't be taught, but if you understand that, if you've seen that, and you put that onto the text, not being attached to it, but just let's see how that feels. Let's try that on and see how it feels. It's very enlightening. It's very insight-provoking, okay? And so you should get to a point in your Christian growth where you're no longer identify with any one of these things, okay? I'm not like a Calvinist. I'm not a mid-Acts dispensationalist. I'm not an Acts 2 dispensationalist. I'm not a provisionist. I'm not a unitive awareness guy. I am not any of those things. But I can hold them all in possibility space, not being emotionally identified with any of them, and I can bring them in on demand. Say, oh, let's bring this one in, and let's bring this one in. So this is one of the first steps to becoming metaparadigmatic is to back away from any particular paradigm and be able to, even on your own, if you're afraid to lose face or anything, even if you just do it on your own, bring in these other paradigms and try to see what exploring looks like within that mindset. Let me pretend I'm a Calvinist for a few minutes and see how this would feel. Let me pretend I'm a provisionist. Let me pretend I'm a Methodist. Let me pretend I'm a Catholic. Let me pretend I'm a Muslim. And then see how that feels if you, really role play into it and really see it from that perspective. Like Jordan Peterson says, let me realistically pretend that I am the Nazi prison guard at, Dachau or something like that, or Auschwitz. Like really put myself in their shoes for real. Try that. The more you practice that, the more you can do so and be less attached and have more appreciation for nuance. And so it starts, you could say that intentionally being multi-paradigmatic in practice is like one of the first baby steps toward becoming non-paradigmatic, to where I genuinely am not attached to any of these. Because if you're Calvinistic and you're trying on provisionist lenses, you're only going to be thinking in polemic the whole time, like why it's wrong, that kind of thing. That's all you're capable of doing. But the more you practice it, the more you put on all the different perspectives, and then you realize how many shortcomings they all have and how many shortcomings each one of us individuals have. There's no way we could see all this stuff, perceive all this stuff. And so then you start to get a little bit epistemic humility, and you start to back off a little bit and realize how much you don't know and how much you can't possibly know. And you start being open to what other paradigms have. Like, I'm not a mid-acts dispensationalist at all. But mid-acts dispensationalism has some great observations because of the lenses they wear that all the other systems miss. And I am a beneficiary of some of the observations that I've gotten from mid-acts dispensationalists. I don't agree with the whole system. It's better to say I don't agree with being identified with any particular system. It's not that it's right or wrong, it's that it has its uses, you see. But there are some great insights there. And there are some things about Calvinism that can, in a roundabout kind of way, wind up being true in a different way than they intend them. It's almost like they're onto something, but they're not seeing it clearly. If you ever played the game Mad Gab, where you have to wear that thing. No, it's where, anyway, look it up. Where you can be saying something that is technically correct, but you can also tell that the person doesn't participatorily know that correct thing firsthand. There's a few things in Calvinism that are like that, which is interesting. I point out the origins that Calvinism has in Gnosticism, and that's designed to kind of shake people awake a little bit, because Gnosticism is a big, bad, evil thing. But just like any other paradigm, just like mid-acts dispensationalism or anything else, just like any of those things, when you put those lenses on, it brings to the surface certain observations that might not otherwise stand out to you. Sometimes geometric shapes can help us understand things that are different. If you take a cylinder, notice I have a cylinder over here. It's the same cylinder as the one over here. But if I take a cross section of the cylinder from the sideways angle, it looks like a circle. If I take a cross section up and down vertically, it looks like a rectangle. Now that's from the same device, just two different angles. So if I were to look at this circle and look at this rectangle and say, hey, these are the same, you would think I'm going nuts. They're not the same. That's a circle, that's a rectangle. But I see the cylinder. And you don't know that I see the cylinder. And all you see are the differences, this delusional difference between things, this delusional barrier between things that makes them not the same, which is how everyone who doesn't understand unitive awareness sees everything. They don't understand the sameness or the connectedness that everything has. And there's a certain perspective. And if you only had this rectangle, you'd have to imagine the cylinder around it. So now that we put it this way, let me try to cover this up. And I could do this in real time right here in this video. Let's cover this up. And now that you can just see the circle and the rectangle, can you imagine the cylinder? You see? Can you imagine now how they are the same? I hope you can. And so when I say imagination, I am not talking about just spontaneously generated fiction at all. Imagination is a tool to poke and prod around to find commonalities or insights or things like this. We need imagination. So when we talk about imagination, especially on this channel, I want you to think about it in this way. I want you to think of imagination as an attempt to see the cylinder, even though you only have the circle and the rectangle available to you. Does that make sense? That's what I'd like you to try to do. And now I can move this little blocker off to the side over here. Once you've seen it, it's easier to imagine. Now, what we're trying to do with the Bible, though, is we're trying to imagine without having seen the cylinder. See, when we're talking about these different models of salvation, like Paul gives us over here, we're trying to imagine without seeing the cylinder. With the kingdom of heaven, we're trying to imagine the cylinder without having seen it. And of course, it's not a cylinder, it's something else. And our question is, what is it? All these different shapes, all these different things are pointing toward the same thing. What are they pointing toward? Another way you could depict it is the shadows that things produce when you shine light from a different perspective. If you take a cylinder and you shine a light on it from one side, it looks like a square. Shine a light from another side, it looks like a circle. Same kind of thing. And so the inquisitive mind, right now, we've got the church of the circle versus the church of the square, and they think they're at odds with each other. Neither one of them are seeing the cylinder. So we need, instead of debating the circle versus the square, we need to come together and join forces and help each other imagine the thing. Like, imagine the cylinder. And of course, we don't have the cylinder. And I kind of want to do something now that I did not think of doing a minute ago, but this is actually a great case in point. So if I were to change this up a little bit, okay, and I were to show you this, can you now imagine? Can you imagine? Let me make this a little bit bigger. Oh, I just gave it away. Can you now imagine what would be there in the middle that matches all three of these shapes? What would that look like? It takes a little bit of imagination. And I will let the cat out of the bag. It is a cylinder that's had the sides shaved off of it. Okay? So that from one angle, it looks like a triangle. From another angle, it looks like a square. From another angle, it looks like the circle. And if modern Christians today were to get a hold of this, they can't perceive the thing in the middle. That's unconscious to them. They don't know what that is. And nobody's trying to see that. But they have all this technical language about the square, and the other denomination has all the technical language about the circle, and the other denomination has all the technical language about the triangle, and none of them are able to perceive the thing because they're all bogged down in their left hemisphere with all the technical language and all the systematic theology around their circle or their square or their triangle. And that's one of the many reasons why systematic theology is bad. Because systematic theology cannot address the thing in the middle. It can only address the square, the circle, or the triangle. That's all it can do, you see? That's all it can do. So it's not the right thing to try to do. Doesn't matter what the content is. Doesn't matter if it's Grudem or Harwood. Doesn't matter what it is. It's not the right thing to try to do. Okay? So you wind up with things like dispensationalism. Maybe that's the square. And covenantal theology. Maybe that's the circle. But I just changed slides without telling you. Because I have my slide deck somewhere else too, on a different monitor, other than the one that I'm showing you. I think Paul and Jesus are both seeing something like this, the thing that's in the middle, but their angle on it. Mixed with our unconscious programming and our presumption that the Bible should be read as a technical manual. It makes us too rigid and unable to see or imagine the perception to which they are actually pointing. Makes it impossible to see. And that's what we're doing. So when I constantly try to get people away from confessions of faith, I know they make you feel safe. I know they make you feel like you're protected. telling you your confession of faith and your statement of faith that makes you feel protected, it's just a child's security blanket. When a home invader comes in and attacks, that you know as well as I do, that security blanket isn't going to help anything. Actually, the fact that the child thinks it's safe makes it worse. And the fact that you think your confession of faith makes you safe makes it worse. It doesn't make anybody safe. Okay? In another previous video, we talked about how Socrates, I don't know if it was in a previous video or in some other research I was doing, if I haven't put it in a video yet, but Socrates was against writing things down. He wanted the interaction to happen, and he thought that if you start writing things, we complain about technology today, like what are iPhones going to do to us? What are computers going to do to us? What's the internet going to do to us? What's AI going to do to us? And we're all weird about that. We don't want it written down. When paper was coming out and becoming more popular, back when they used to write on the little slate boards and every student had the slate board in front of them, all the adults of the time were against having paper because we had slate boards, and what are you going to do with all that paper when everybody's against everything. But anyway, it's not the point. But Socrates was afraid that writing things down would cause people to stop thinking and interacting on the fly. I don't want to say randomly, but spontaneously, extemporaneously. So he said the best thing for the mind was to constantly be engaged in extemporaneous interaction that's genuine. And as soon as you write something down, it leads to not thinking, and the idea lives outside of your mind on a page somewhere. And then sophistry comes from having things written down to some point. Anyway, I'm probably oversimplifying things, but think into it. So, looking at these 4 different models, okay, the judicial forensic model is like God is the lawgiver and the judge. We see this in Romans 1, 2, and 3. The resurrection is the proof that the payment was made. And the belief means that you trust that it works. It's not just to believe that it is so, it's to trust that it works. And one of the key terms there is justification. Okay? Now we're real familiar with this. And this is really what we've picked up and ran with. This is what Martin Luther picked up and ran with. And this is what we have picked up and ran with in evangelicalism. Our understanding of salvation and PSA, why can't I think right now? Penal substitutionary atonement is a mutation of the judicial forensic model, if you will. We have the participationist model of salvation, and that is like, Paul was an apocalyptic kind of Jew, and they basically saw sin as this cosmic demonic power in the universe that has imprisoned and trapped and enslaved people. It's at enmity with God. It enslaves people and forces them to do things that are against God's will. And the power of sin led to the power of death. And the problem is enslavement. And this is just another way of looking at it. And what's needed is liberation. So Christ takes the power of sin and death unto himself. And then he kills the power of sin and death. And then you would have to ask the question, how do you appropriate this? So up here, if you appropriate this one by believing, and belief means to trust that it works, then how would you appropriate this one? Well, according to the scholars, the appropriation is by salvation, which checks out because this model comes from Romans 5 through 8. So Paul, in the book of Romans, he's laying out how salvation works. And we tend to think of it as a technical manual, like his closest thing to a systematic theology. But what we should really see it as is a few different parabolic stabs at what it's like Jesus, the kingdom of heaven is like. Salvation, the gospel, is the way it works. The mechanics of it is like this, okay? And we tend to think of sin as infractions. In Augustine's original sin, that's not found in any of Paul's writings. That's an Augustine thing, okay? We don't carry Paul's guilt, but it's just like a baby is born ignorant and needs to have that ignorance kind of cured. We are born into a certain state. And even after our enculturation, We have all kinds of unconscious programmings that we don't realize that we have. And we're unconscious to them. We're slaves to them. And don't think in some kind of metaphysical Gnostic sense like the Calvinists do, okay? But it's just the condition in which we are in, unless somebody leads us a helping hand that we can in turn latch back onto, we're kind of hopeless. So this is not a payment model like the other one was, or the redemption one is, or, you know, there could be a judicial payment versus a monetary payment. Two different ways of looking at things. It's not a payment model. The follower becomes united in Christ and participates with Christ's death and victory. It doesn't happen through believing, but through baptism. This is according to the scholars who have disambiguated all this out. Now, if you take this from a typical Protestant mindset, you would think water baptism. If you take this from a dispensational mindset, you would say, oh, that must be a spiritual baptism, the baptism of when when the Holy Spirit baptizes you into Christ in a 1 Corinthians 12 kind of way. Okay? And then, but if you're looking at it from a wisdom pattern kind of way, order, disorder, reorder, this is when your experiences identify you through ego deaths with the death and resurrection of Christ, of which, you know, water baptism would be symbolizing that. So this is an apocalyptic perspective. The mechanics of it are not as important as the fact that it works, and that would go for all four of these models of salvation. Paul isn't actually trying to he's not trying to explain the mechanics. He's trying to orient you kind of to how it works in the same way that Mufasa is orienting Simba to the light and the boundaries of the kingdom. Okay? And then there's the mediation models, one mediator between God and man, the man Christ Jesus. Like you've done something against God and you're alienated from God, like two friends who have had an argument against each other. Christ is the mediator to get them back on the same page. More like you could also say that this is a reconciliation of an exchanged relationship. So you could call this the reconciliation model, a mediation reconciliation model of salvation. And it might help if I were to maybe put that reconciliation in bold there so you can see those together, mediation and reconciliation. And then you have the redemption model, redemption, paying a price, not paying a penalty, but handing money over to redeem a coupon or a voucher or something like that. So it's helpful to me to see these, and you see Paul swap between these kinds of things. You can see him just in my mind, I'm cursorily thinking through Romans 6 and 8, really, and I can see the mediation thing, enmity against God, Romans 8, 7 through 8. The participationist model. Therefore, we are buried with him by baptism into death, that like as Christ was raised up from the dead, even so we also shall walk in newness of life. Okay, I can see that as the order, disorder, reorder. So you can see, it's like Paul has these different models and he's kind of jumping between them. Okay, not trying to give you a technical definition, but kind of jumping between them. So when I say that none of these are intended to be taken dogmatically, it's going to be interpreted by like Calvinists and people like that as if I'm trying to get out of a boxed-in position where someone who is rigidly dogmatic thinks they have me cornered. Oh, I've got you with total depravity in Romans 3, and this isn't generated in response to trying to prove another ideology wrong. It's just an attempt to see where Paul's coming from. And so I'm simply not attempting to even play that kind of game at all. That's not what I'm trying to do at all. So this kind of thing that we're talking about in this session, while true, is not going to win a debate. You're not going to be able to take this mindset and go disprove a Calvinist or a Mormon or a Jehovah's Witness or a charismatic or a Catholic or a provisionist with this. It's not what it's for. It's not what the Bible should be used for anyway. It's not what we should be engaged in at all. Okay? It's not going to win a debate that is built on countless false premises from our unconscious programming. If you want to have fellowship with people who are trying to do the same thing that you're trying to do, you need to help disabuse people of their unconscious programming first, or find people who are disabused of their unconscious programming and be in fellowship with them as you explore in an open-ended and nuanced and earnest way. But you can't do it with an ideologue. You can't be in fellowship with an ideologue if you are non-ideologically following the way that is Christ and exploring it and trying to make your life and the world a much better place by doing so. Debates operate in service to post-enlightenment rationalistic metrics that are not appropriate for addressing something like the Bible, which is more like learning how to surf or sail or dance or fight. Truth is not adaptive in rivalrous scenarios. In war, truth is the first casualty. And debate and combative antagonism is sublimated war, in which case truth will be the first casualty. So debate, not only should it not be employed, it cannot help find truth. It cannot do it. It is wholly and entirely the wrong kind of thing to try to arrive at truth. And I want to take the word truth, let's pull it away from this noun that we probably think is a body of statements. And truth is more like a verb. You're just true thing. There's truthfulness and there's true thing, which is more like surfing. Okay? In the rifle prayer, the Marine Corps they say, I will fire my rifle true. What does that mean? It means you hit the target. Okay? And think of surfing true, or think of sailing true. It means you're able to get to your intended destination. You're able to do the thing that you're trying to do and do it well and navigate appropriately despite the unpredictability of the fluid dynamics and the wind in which you're having to operate. Because if you're born of the Spirit, that's what it's about. It's about moving with that wind, whithersoever it listeth. And that's it. That's it for this video. The 4 models of salvation are designed to be seen as pointing at something, not as technical trade language that we should make rigid dogmas out of. If you enjoy what you're getting here, please consider supporting us financially. It takes a lot of time, space, resources, energy, money, software, hardware, subscriptions to all kinds of things to bring this stuff to pass. And so if you can be part of this ministry, that would be very much helpful. The kind of stuff that we cover on here is not the kind of stuff that exactly goes viral and makes a lot of money through monetization on any of the social media platforms, including YouTube. It makes a little bit, but not nearly enough. So if you want to see this kind of thing continue, please partner with us by supporting us financially. You can do so in those 5 ways. If none of those 5 work for you, shoot me an email and you can do something else, checks or whatever you want to do. Okay, so just appreciate anybody who's willing and able to help. We are on several different social media platforms. You can find us on Facebook, and over here on the left, I have all of these social media platform names listed, what the handle is on there. So we are on Facebook and Instagram and X and TikTok and Snapchat if you like any of those. Remember on YouTube to subscribe to the channel. Somebody just asked me today, how can I be notified of this upcoming live stream? We have one coming up on January 13th. Well, subscribe to the channel and hit the bell icon, and then you will be notified on your device every time we release a video or have an upcoming live stream or anything like that. So like the channel to help boost the channel's popularity. Subscribe, hit the bell icon, be notified of all future videos and live streams. Also, we have one-on-one consultations available. I do not boast of any kind of certifications or professional capability, but all you're doing is it's a paid one-on-one consultation. You are simply compensating me for my time to take all of the areas in which we have developed fluencies on this channel over the years and apply them to your specific personal situation. So if you think that would be valuable to you, I will focus on whatever your issue is and try to point you to what I think will help you. And that's in 1-hour segments. So that is available also. So we're on social media, and please support us if you can. Thanks for watching. May the Lord bless you, and good day.